All right, there we go. Hi, everyone. This is acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology, and today I'm going to be talking about the square between the Sun and Mars and Neptune. So it's a configuration of 3 planets that's happening this week. It's a pretty powerful transit. I came on and started a live cast just a few minutes ago, and it seemed like there were some problems with my audio, so I'm just restarting this, and hopefully it'll work this time. But you're free to ask questions if you have them as I go along. I thought I would do a live stream because it's been kind of fun to switch it up lately. People have been asking for more of these. And so I thought I'd just come on live and talk about this transit rather than recording it today. How does the audio sound? Does it sound better now? Okay, great. Perfect. Woohoo. All right. So the transit, as I was mentioning, is happening between the Sun in Gemini, Neptune in Pisces, and Mars in Pisces. It's going to happen pretty much tomorrow and Thursday are the hot moments for the Sun and Neptune. Mars and Neptune gets together over the weekend. So you give it about a week to be feeling the effects I'm going to talk about today. I want to try to talk about how it's going to be affecting people personally and collectively. But interestingly, this transit is about the dynamic between the individual and the collective. There's a lot to say about that right now. So, but I'll try to make this concise. If you have questions as I go along, please feel free to put them in the chat box. And I have some points that I'm going to try to bring. I have some notes that I'm going to try to bring up as I go along as well. So in ancient astrology, the first thing to note is that in any aspect configuration between planets, I did a talk yesterday on aspects, or I posted one yesterday. So if you missed that, check it out because it's a good talk on aspects. And a really important thing to remember when studying aspects is that one planet is always going to be exerting its sort of dominant influence upon the other. So I was thinking about this today, and I was thinking about my girls who have been, those stamps, you press them into the ink and then you press it onto the paper, and you can, you get like a whole stamp collection that they have, and they press it into the ink and put it on the paper. And then eventually, it's like it's on their clothes, it's on me, my shorts are ruined. It's like my reality with stamps right now. But you take a stamp and you impress it upon the paper. So in an aspectual relationship, there's always something like that going on where one planet, or 2 planets, in this case, Mars and Neptune, will be impressing themselves upon another planet. And that was called the superior aspect. It sort of is a way of saying that there's always, within an aspect, there's always going to be a planet that's more yang-like, and there's always going to be one that's more yin-like. So right now, Mars and Neptune are the yang impressing their stamp upon the Sun. That's where we're starting. There are 2 dimensions to this that I want to talk about today. One is the way in which Neptune and Mars can impress themselves upon the Sun positively and negatively. So, the Sun, what does the Sun represent? Let's remember this. Just to give a basic, simple definition. The Sun represents one's individual sense of purpose, ambition, or destiny. Remember that in ancient astrology, you're coming from a kind of Platonic Pythagorean tradition, Hermetic tradition, Indian yogic perspective as well. And in that perspective, the soul is in motion. The soul is like never resting. Even when you're sleeping, there's stuff moving, right? So your mind is moving. So we're always looking for a center around which to orbit. And the center around which we orbit, we construct and we build in material terms into like an ego, but we also have ideals, beliefs, aspirations that give us a central sense of meaning or purpose in life. And that's what the Sun was connected to. The greatest joy for ancient astrologers was for the sun to embody the highest truth, the highest goodness, the highest beauty, the highest divinity, and that we orbit around that. So if you think about all the shrines in the world that have some kind of deity or altar at the center around which people are orbiting in prayer, right? That's the Sun at the center. And also, just like the sun comes up in the morning and we get out of bed and we sort of follow the sun into a course of action for the day, and our day is part of a week and our week is part of a month, and maybe you've got like a 5-year plan going or something like that. So the sun is the generative force of motion that impels and compels the soul toward its ideal image in the sense of a personal human destiny, but also hopefully in terms of higher spiritual ideals. But it's individual. That's the important thing, is that it brings us down to the place where we are select. Now, the moon, the counterpart to the sun, represented the city, which is way in which we are a part of a group or a collective. For example, you're a part of a tribe, you're a part of a nation, you have a favorite sports team that you like, you're born into different categories of being, from gender, race, ethnicity, historical conditions that you're born into. But all those collective we's are related to the moon, whereas the sun is, how are you select? How do you stand out as a completely unique individual that can't ever be contained by anything categorical in a sense? So those two stand apart as opposites that have a dance with one another. Well, Neptune is very moon-like, right? And so what you're looking at when Mars and Neptune get together is a collective force exerting or impressing upon the sun a kind of agenda that's Mars-like. So that's kind of a short philosophical description of what's happening right now. The sun is the way that we are each unique. We each have this unique spark of destiny that we're following, like a plot line in a movie, the hero's journey, and so forth. And it's completely individual, and it's about how you stand out from a collective, whether it's how I stood out from my family. I was a black sheep and I had to become something, I had to individuate, or whatever the case might be. But that's the sun. How am I select? Just like in the evening, the stars and the moonlight and the shadows swim together so that the differences between things are not as distinct. But during the daytime, the shadows flee and the light comes out and you can see the distinctions between each thing. Look at that individual tree. Look at this individual, flower, like that. So the sunlight illuminates distinction and selection out of the ocean, the oceanic collective. All right, so now imagine that the sun right now is getting stamped on by Mars and Neptune. Neptune is like the moon, but it's even bigger than the moon. The moon has to do with the more personal sphere of we that we encounter. Your family, your socioeconomic status, your gender, race, creed, sex, all of those different categories that we're either born with or that, people try to put on us in the environment somehow, that that is a part of our story. Like the environment or habitat is to an animal. A cheetah is not the same as where are they from? They're from, I can't remember where their habitat is, but they're in, I think it's Africa somewhere. So you can imagine like the African landscape that a cheetah is in. That doesn't describe the cheetah. The cheetah is described by, its spots or whatever. But the environment will play still. You can't separate the cheetah from the environment. So it's not the cheetah, but it's part of the cheetah. You got that? So similarly, like I'm not my family, but I can't exclude the description of my past or my ancestry as a part of who I am either. So that's the tension always between the individual and the collective that we see between the sun and the moon. And Neptune is like that version of the environmental, but blow it out to collectives that are very, very big and massive. So the collective of Neptune is like the historical force of race in America right now, or the historical force of the Christian religion in the West, or the historical presence of, colonizing Europeans in India, or something like that. You take Neptune, and what you're really looking at are these collectives that are really, really big and last for very long periods of time that are typically much broader and much more diverse and sophisticated to understand than the immediate personal sphere of environmental factors that can be summed up by the moon in a chart. Okay, so you just like blow it out to these big, like if you think about the Neptune as like the zeitgeist of, the modern era, say the last 75 years of American cultural developments, then you're starting to get into Neptunian territory. If you look at the zeitgeist of maybe something a little bit narrower, even like the 60s and the 70s, or something like that in culture, in popular culture, and the range of things that happened and defined that culture, the ups and downs, and your participation in that collective force of history, then you're starting to get into Neptune territory. So Neptune's very oceanic like this. And when it gets together with Mars, it gets really interesting because Mars is, of course, the god of war. Mars always has action and an agenda behind it and says, we're going to do this, we're going to fight for this. And oftentimes Mars, in order to win, someone else has to lose. right? So it's not like oftentimes Mars is like, look, I need to dominate, I need to win, I need to conquer, I need to be victorious, and it's against someone or something. It has that sense of combativeness to it. So when you see Mars and Neptune getting together, you're often feeling the collective force of polarization, of fighting, of missions and battles, and the way in which the collective will often express itself in terms of a fight. I was thinking about this the other day because I was kind of noticing some things that were going on in the world, and I was like, wow, this has been, it's like if you go on social media right now, one of the things that you'll notice with Mars approaching Neptune is that there's the collectivization of will, right? Like being a part of some cause or some effort or some mission or some battle that's bigger than ourselves. That's a perfect expression of Mars Neptune. But so too is the feeling that in either you're with us or F you. You know what I mean? And like that could be a positive thing. It could be a really negative thing. It depends. So it depends on the situation. But that's the kind of energy that's in the air right now with Mars Neptune, the collective battle cry, and also the collective persecution, or the collective saying you're either fighting for this, or either join us, or you're not worth anything, maybe. So that's the Mars Neptune, right? Now, so this is like, you can see it all over right now in the news, social media, with the way in which polarization is taking place, and people are drawing sands on the line and identifying with the we that they feel most aligned with, even if, and this is the thing, is that, remember, this is now impressing itself on the sun, even if that somehow consumes or devours or completely annihilates something very individual about a person. So this is where the light and dark side of this transit comes in. Let's talk about the light side first. So Mars Neptune exerting itself, impressing itself upon the sun, can be like, look, you're not just a little individual, select, unique center of consciousness. As much as you would like to be wholly unique unto yourself, you are also a creature of environment. You are a creature of history. And so, there's this call to join your individual ego self, your individual sense of purpose and destiny, which is completely unique to some larger cause or effort. And that could be, for some people, it's going to be, things that are happening in the larger world. It could be happening at work. It could be happening in your family. But you may feel the sense of needing to identify or align your individual story somehow with a collective effort or fight or will or action. And that could be really good, because sometimes we like to pretend that we are above environmental conditioning. Oh, I'm an individual. I don't need to take part in this stuff because I'm above all of it. These are all just temporary material designations anyway, and I'm just trying to see the world individual by individual. You know what I mean? And that's, in a sense, that's true. And we're going to flip this in the other direction in a second and show how that may actually be a really important stand to take in some ways right now. But on the other hand, it can be a defense against recognizing the way in which we are participatory agents in collectives that are bigger than ourselves. So that's the Mars Neptune in the positive sense. It can call the ego or the individual destiny into some kind of collective action or effort. Now, the shadow side, or the dark side of this, is going to be when the individual is annihilated or absorbed into a collective to its detriment. So let's just give a very kind of gross, I know this is kind of like an intense image, but think of like a suicide bomber. We've seen so many images of like suicide bombings, or people who, in some of these protest images, we've seen people try to drive cars into protesters and, stuff like that. So you think about the person who is, they identify so strongly with their cause that they're willing to just murder or annihilate other people. They're so strongly identified with some collective force that they literally lose their mind and become they become they become the bomb. They become the Mars Neptune, some kind of collective annihilating force. So that's the really dark side of the square between the Sun, Mars, and Neptune, where the individual loses sanity and becomes the weapon of some collective wave, right? On the other hand, there are, slightly more noble versions of that, right? Where a person may give their life like a martyr. You think about that guy, I think it was in Tiananmen Square. I can't remember where it was, where the guy stood in front of the tanks that were coming. Do you guys remember that image? Someone remembers where that comes from. But there is the sense of laying down one's life in selfless service or sacrifice, and that could be good. I'm not saying that losing oneself is always a bad thing. Certainly, we've had examples of people who, you think of the picture of the Vietnamese monk who lit himself on fire in protest back in I want to say it was the 60s, maybe it was the late 50s. But there are moments where sending a message means to completely absorb ourselves in a collective action, and Mars, Neptune on the Sun can bring that, and maybe that's positive. But the potential shadow is to lose one's sanity or individuality in some, in some kind of collective madness. To me, that would be the dark side of Mars, Neptune. So another example of this. Okay, so I was at a football game several years ago, and this football game, I was not a fan of like either of the teams. I was there with some family members, and this was an NFL football game here in Baltimore. And if I remember correctly, it was like a Cincinnati versus Baltimore game. There's this like a big rivalry. And I was out by the concession stands in the bathrooms or whatever. And there were two groups of people who were wearing jerseys. Like some had Ravens jerseys, some had Bengals jerseys. And they got into a brawl with each other. And I was like standing right there, and I was like, oh my God, like this is so intense. And the immediate thing that I thought to myself was like, you guys have drank too much and you have completely lost the plot, because this is a made up game between people who aren't really like, they're paid professional athletes. Many of the athletes here, if you know anything about professional athletic culture, they're going to similar football camps as kids, or they're playing on the same college teams, or they've been to training camps together and they hang out and work out together as friends. They're not these athletes, although they're very competitive, a lot of them are friends with each other, so these artificial divides of like my city versus your city, and we're going to get into this big fight with each other because we wear different jerseys. I was looking at it and being like, this is absurd. You guys have completely lost the plot. It's a game, and there was this really interesting moment though, because I wasn't wearing a jersey because I'm a Vikings fan. So I'm at this game and I'm like, yeah, I don't care about this game. It's just fun to be here with family. And I was wearing a winter coat. And I remember as they were like battling with each other, and I didn't get too crazy, but the police came and stuff like that and broke it up, or the security guards or whoever they were. So, but there was one guy in particular who looked right into my eyes like, what the F team are you on? Like, am I brawling you, or like, are you with me? Like, cause I wasn't wearing a jersey, and there's a bunch of people just like going at it with their jerseys. And I was like, oh my God, this is crazy. And I was like, I just like turned around. I was like, I'm not like, like screw this. I like the Vikings. Does that count? So anyway, I'll just never forget that moment, because it was, and anyway, there was a Mars Neptune aspect going on at that time. And I made note of it afterward. And of course, I was with family members who don't give a rat's ass about astrology, but I'm sitting there being like, oh, that's so interesting. There's Mars and Neptune. So, so like, it's not something I could ever like reflect upon with them afterward. Anyway, but that was a classic Mars Neptune event that occurred in my life that I'll never forget, where, it's Dionysian. You can just get torn apart by some kind of collective ecstasy. But ecstasy is complicated. Some people are like, oh, it's anger. Anger is bad, right? And they'll just Mars bad. Well, anger's not. It's everything in creation is a reflection of divinity. So it's not. It has a place. So does war. So does battle. So But there is a weird way in which, what we fight for and how we fight really matters. The ecstasy of war and the ecstasy of a collective cause can enliven us, and it can also completely shred us apart. And so those tensions right now within the soul, within your individual soul, that's like in the spotlight. And how you're feeling that personally is going to be very different from how other people are feeling that. If you're a person of color in our country right now, you are feeling something that is very different from what someone like myself is feeling, who hasn't lived that life. You know what I mean? So you're going to experience these tensions in very, very different ways. But I think and also, like, if you're frankly, like, I have family members all across the political spectrum, and watching everybody respond and draw the lines in the sand and be like, well, you're either on my team, or you're on this team, or like, are you, everyone, like, everyone's ready to throw down, and so the shadow side of this is also like, don't lose your individuality. Your individuality is your saintliness. That's where you find your true source of empathy. That's where you find your true source of compassion, your true source of authenticity. It's in the inner sanctuary of your heart, and the completely infinitely unique relationship that you have with your source, that you have to cultivate. Because if you're not going to get tossed around by the waves of environmental conditioning that happen in our lives personally, in our families, in our work, in our relationships, what to speak of these massive collective forces of history, you have to have an individual sense of soul. That has to be cultivated. However you cultivate it is fine, but you'll notice that people who have not cultivated that can get torn apart by these collective forces. So the need to set the ego aside and participate in something collective, to not just be a walled off monad, in isolation from the rest of the world. Oh, I'm just above it all. I'm an individual. This doesn't apply to me. How shallow that people are even thinking about such environmental conditioning factors. They're an illusion. Can't you just get over it? It's like, oh my God, how annoying is that voice right now? But on the other hand, flip it. And people who are, people who can't stand in their infinite uniqueness, that has nothing to do with any temporal material condition that you've been born into, and that will get torn apart by things, and cannot see individuality, cannot listen, does not have the patience to listen and see each soul individually. Either you're either with this titanic wave, or you're nothing to me. Well, we've said when we say something like that to anyone is that I am no longer an individual who sees every single thing in creation as infinitely unique. That's all we've said, and that's a great blasphemy. So we have to be very careful of that in the opposite direction. But the thing is, you have to keep, these transits are like jewels. They're archetypal jewels. They have many dimensions and many sides to them. You have to keep turning it. So if you feel tempted into like, well, I'm just this utterly infinitely unique soul, and I see every single thing individually unique. And if you start using that and it becomes like a hardened defense, turn the jewel again. Just keep turning it and be like, no, I'm a part of a collective. I'm a part of a we. I have to participate. And then when you get into the we and you start losing your shit on Facebook and wanting to annihilate everyone who doesn't agree with you, or get up on a self-righteous throne with a megaphone just trying to obliterate all opposition, check yourself, come back to your individuality. Remember that each thing is incredibly unique. Remember your compassion. Remember the compassion that you need as an individual to have any ground for being at all. So, and then turn it again, because if that becomes entrenched or rigid, it'll be problematic again. The need to keep turning the jewel right now between the individual and the collective is very important. I think that's the basic meaning of this transit. It's very strong this week, but it's been building for a while. And don't forget that underneath all of this is the the Mars-Neptune dynamic is hosted by the fallen Jupiter in conjunction with Pluto, which is very intense. And it is, and as I've talked about in many other videos, is sort of pressing us into an examination of where different ideological systems are falling apart or in need of revision or reform. It's very societal. And there can be real progress right now, especially as Jupiter goes to conjoin Pluto at the end of the month. There can be real reform that's made in very mundane ways too. Like I'm reforming some very basic things about my courses. as I'm seeing certain ways in which they need to evolve or grow. So it can be very simple. It doesn't always have to be as titanic as everything that's happening in the collective. These same forces will make their way into your lives right now in ways that are very basic, in friendships, with your family, with your work, with your kids, with your parenting, whatever it is. So that's what I have for you. I want to remind everybody I have to go because I have an appointment in 1 minute. I just wanted to hop on live and say hi to you guys and do something live. So let's see. Okay, so what I want to mention. Oh yeah. So my new class starts on Sunday, Ancient Astrology for the Modern Mystic. There is still a little bit of time left to register. You have until Sunday to get the early bird discount, which is $500 off. The need-based tuition is there if you're struggling at all due to COVID-19 or the course is out of your price range somehow. We really try not to turn people down at all for financial reasons. And there's also a tuition plan if you need it. Check it out at nightlightastrology.com. If you have any questions, info@nightlightastrology.com. I hope to see some of you there. Thank you for all being here. I realized that I was thinking that I was going to get done with this in 20 minutes and have like 10 minutes left for Q&A, but I don't. I have a session. So it was nice to see all of you. I hope you have a really nice day. And please tell me your stories in the chat box after I post this or now. I'd just love to hear how you're noticing these energies showing up in your life or how you've been processing them and working with the back and forth pressure that we've described today. All right, take it easy, everyone. Bye.